In this particular one, in chapter 12, they're reviewing history, which is all of the Bible and all of history. And it basically presents Israel, the nation of Israel, as a woman, and Satan as a beast that is pursuing her.
Welcome, everyone, to podcast number 227, Renew Your Mind. With us today, we have Senior Pastor Paul Gruenberg. We also have Pastor Jeremy Touroo. Myself, Dana Hall, is the moderator, and we have a special guest, Cindy Miller, who's written a Bible study on Revelation, and she's discussing the book as we go through all of the chapters. So we are into chapters 12, 13, and 14, and Pastor Paul asked Cindy a few questions during our break, and we're going to have him ask again.
So one of the things, Cindy, that you have noted in your chart on the whole book of Revelation are these interludes. Just really briefly, what is an interlude?
An interlude is a literary insert which refers back to previous times or from another perspective.
Okay, so it could be like a flashback of an earlier time.
Right.
And when you say different perspective, what do you mean in that regard? A different perspective of?
Well, of the point that is being talked about. In this particular one, in chapter 12, they're reviewing history, which is all of the Bible and all of history. And it basically presents Israel, the nation of Israel, as a woman, and Satan as a beast that is pursuing her.
So, for instance, when we get into 12, it says, "A great and wondrous sign appeared in the heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she gave birth." So that 12 is a number, when I think in terms of biblical numbers, could represent the 12 tribes of Israel.
Right.
Or the 12 sons of Jacob.
Right.
And then she was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in the heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky, flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth. Now, when I think of a woman representing Israel about to give birth, that birth, because it seems pretty significant here, would seem to me to be the birth of someone important.
Right, the Messiah.
Okay. So the Messiah, so this has already happened. Remember, John is writing about an event that happened around 90 or 94 AD, and Jesus has been gone physically and raised from the dead some potentially 61 to 65 years, 64 years before. So he's recapping this event of the Messiah coming into, or putting on flesh, coming into the world. And so it says, let's see, verse 5, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And of course, that's going to be Jesus. Mm-hmm. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. Would that have been after the resurrection?
Right. That's after his crucifixion. And when he goes up to heaven, and then when the rapture happens, he brings his people. But you got to remember that this is written from a heavenly, eternal perspective, not chronological. So heaven's perspective is eternal. Earth's perspective is in time.
Correct. So it goes on to talk about the woman flying into the desert, to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years. And then verse 7 is really interesting because it really gives that heavenly perspective. And it starts off, and there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. Would that be a perspective of what's going on today? What's been going on since the time of Christ?
I think since creation, Satan has been fighting. They say that the serpent in Eden becomes a red dragon in Revelation.
Right.
So, the Satan has been fighting God since creation.
And it talks about Satan being cast out of heaven and taking his angels with him, who are demons. So chronologically, that's happened before Christ was born.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there's almost a flashback and then another flashback of how the angels experienced their departure from heaven. And it even says in verse 9, the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. So there in this interlude, we have a picture of the birth of the Messiah and going back up to heaven after the resurrection. And then we've got even a further flashback of when the devil was cast out of heaven with his angels, which if we think in terms of the number of angels, there were a third of all angels that fell with Satan. So that's a ton of angels. There's still 2/3 of angels on God's side. Yay!
Thank goodness.
So when we continue on in verse 10, it says, then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, now have come the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers who accuses them before our God day and night has been hurled down. So when and verse 11 talks about the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, which is very New Testament. So we get back to 13, verse 13. It says, when the dragon saw that he had been hurled down to earth, he pursued. Now we're still in this interlude, which represents, as you were talking earlier, it represents chapters 6 through 11. Correct?
Right. History. Well, yeah. Actually, that's chapter 13. I think this chapter 12 represents all of history from creation and to the present.
Okay. And then when you get to 13, it talks in terms of the beast out of the sea, who had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on his horns. What is that representative of?
I think that is representative of the Antichrist and Satan.
Okay.
And human governments. They say that the Antichrist will rise out of Rome and that Europe at that time will be 10 horns, 10 empires or something combined.
Okay, so
Europe.
right now, the European Union, if we look at that, that's 20-some countries, 26
Right.
or 27 countries. So for this to be about the European nation, it would have to be these
10.
10 is the number.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that
So-
it's got to go from 20-something to 10. It could be just that
Yeah,
10 have more power
or they combine or something. Who knows?
So
I don't know.
This
It's
is
prophetic.
this is a part of the weeds, right? Mm-hmm. Getting into the weeds and trying to figure out what one thing represents another. And again, of course, we want to caution ourselves that we don't really know. how all
Right.
of the pieces fit together. And I think some of this will be known in retrospect. You know, after something happens, we can see in retrospect how this prophecy or this telling of the end times will have been fulfilled.
Right. Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, so the beasts, there are two beasts. Going to verse 11, then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. So one came out of the sea, and then the second one comes out of the earth, who had two horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. Again, the dragon is representative of Satan. He exercises all the authority of the first beast on his behalf. So this would be the, you had said it earlier, not the beast, but the prophet? Antichrist.
And the false prophet. The Antichrist and the false prophet, yeah.
So this is the false prophet then? The second beast?
Second beast, yeah.
Okay.
Is the false prophet and the Antichrist the same? One and the same,
No.
or two different? Okay, so repeat it, because I think I heard you say first it was the Antichrist, and then I heard the false prophet.
The Antichrist, the false prophet helps the Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the false prophet is the one who issues the mark at the end of chapter 13, and the mark honors the Antichrist.
Okay, got it.
So, false prophet is like an assistant to the Antichrist.
And then again in this interlude, we're reaching that place where we get to chapter 14, and it talks about the Lamb and the 144,000 again.
I think the 44,000 are the Jewish witnesses that were killed right before the in chapter 11, right before the rapture, and then raptured with the Christians.
Okay, and that would begin chapter 14, which references back to chapter 11. Moving on, there are three angels flying in the air, and he had an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, where in verse 6, to every nation, tribe, language, and people, he said in a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens and the earth, the sea and the springs of water. The second angel followed and said, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all of the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. Now, Babylon the Great, Babylon in the Old Testament was the kingdom that overthrew all of Israel.
Judah.
Mm-hmm. So
chapter 17 and 18 describe the Babylon, the mystery, the harlot.
Okay, and we'll get to that in another podcast. And so this is like a foreshadowing then?
Right.
Okay. And a foreshadowing is just something that's spoken about before it happens. If anyone worships the beast in his image and receives the mark on his forehead or the hand, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury. So if somebody says, hey, you need to take a mark for the beast, don't do it. Which has been poured out full strength into the cup of wrath. Now, the wrath is the judgment of God. These bowls of judgments that are going to be coming up, it's going to be horrendous. No one survives. And he will be tormented with burning. So he's talking in terms of what's going to happen. And then verse 13, then I heard a voice from heaven say, write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them. This would, Cindy, would this tie in back to the rapture then?
Right. That's the two harvests, I think, represent the time of judgment and the time of rapture.
So we've been talking about the harvest of people. And then in verse 14, I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like the Son of Man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice, To him who is sitting on the cloud, take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of earth is ripe. So he who was seated on the cloud swung the sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Now, when it talks about that harvesting, Cindy, is that the harvesting of Christians, or is that the harvesting of something else?
Okay, which verse were you talking about?
Verses 14 through 16. Chapter 14.
I think that's the rapture.
Okay.
I think it talks about the rapture first, even though it happens.
Well, this is
before
still the interlude.
The rapture happens first, and then God's judgment is poured out, and that's the second harvest.
Okay, and that would start in verse 17 then?
Right.
Another angel comes out of the temple of heaven. He too has a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had a sharp sickle, take your sharp sickle and gather the cluster of grapes from the earth's vines, because the grapes are ripe. The angel swung his sickle from the earth, gathered the grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. So this is not the fruit of the Spirit.
No.
These are the bad people who have rejected God.
Right.
They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and the blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 strata, which is about 180 miles. So that 14:17 is talking about a judgment.
Right, and that's Armageddon. That's the Battle of Armageddon.
Okay.
Well, good. Well, we're going to wrap it up on that. We did not make it through all the entire book of Revelation, so we'll have to have Cindy come back a little bit more. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. We come to you from the Gaylord Methodist Church. We have 2 services on Sunday, a 9 a.m. traditional and a 10:45 contemporary. We also, on Wednesdays, every second and fourth weeks of the month, we have a 7:15 Encountering God service, and that's a format where you can ask questions. We'd love to see you in person, however, if you can't, you can see us via Facebook or YouTube. You can call the office if you have any questions, 989-732-5380. You can also Google us, and our website has a lot of information for you to review. So thank you again. This coming weekend is our chili cook-off on February 9th, so we hope you can join us for that. Have a great week, everyone.